right, Jim. Anyone who's been a consumer of the intelligence that Section 702 provides us, and that, of course, would include former President Trump, should understand the significance of that. And then let's overlay on the time that we're talking about right now. Israel is at war with Hamas. Hamas, we know, has a presence here in the United States. The idea that we would turn off the prime vision, the prime insight that we have into terrorists who are overseas, terrorists like Hamas terrorists, who may, in fact, be talking to people in the United States and planning activities here. We don't know that, but it's certainly a top priority for the FBI right now. The idea that we would turn off that flow of information, which is entirely lawful and has survived every court challenge, is just astounding to me. There is no one in the community, in the intelligence community, who would support such a thing.
Well, here's the problem with what Andy McCabe is saying here. And welcome back to the program. Dana Lash with you at the top of the second hour. This has to do with that Section 702 reauthorization in the FISA bill. There was discussion as to whether or not they were going to make some changes regarding warrants to spy on people. And as Massey noted, there's a difference in voting on the bill itself and then voting on, provisions like 702, which is what they were doing. It wasn't like a vote on the bill. It was there were 6 amendments that were tied to this proposal that were dealing with warrants as it relates to Section 702. And that was the amendment that specifically dealt with the requirement for a warrant. And there were some other things as well attached to it. But Thomas Massey was explaining the procedural votes yesterday, and how you had 19 Democrats that voted with 19 Republicans that voted with Democrats to stop the warrant amendment to FISA from coming to the floor. And there's a lot of Republicans who are very opposed to warrantless surveillance. And there's a reason why. And let me just explain this to you. This was the surveillance program that was authorized. It's Section 702. FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And it was about tracking foreign spies and terrorists, right? It wasn't supposed to be used against Americans. It's not supposed to be something used to track your phone calls and your activity. It's your emails, your electronic communications. But that's ultimately what it turned into. It changed into this thing that absolutely took a warrantless examination of Americans' electronic communications. And I'm not the person who's saying this. That's a certification report from the FISA court itself, as well as a White House advisory board that was back in 23 of last year. And so in that, there are a couple of other third-party reports that came out detailing the abuse of this. All of this first came out back in 2019 when the FISA court demanded that the FBI submit a plan to fix some of these problems that came to light after the 2016 election, when you literally had this exact same abuse that was weaponized against Carter Page. This is what we talk about when we say that FISA was weaponized against, average everyday people like Carter Page. He was a Trump campaign aide. And they weren't investigating, and this nuance is important. They weren't investigating whether or not Carter Page was compromised by Russians. They were concerned with creating the narrative that Carter Page was compromised by Russians. It was so bad, and the FBI cut so many, and Reason Magazine listed all of the corners that they cut on the applications and the information that they omitted. This is how bad it was. Carter Page was a CIA asset against the Russians. The FBI, because they didn't do their due diligence, omitted all of this in pursuit of a narrative that he was compromised by Russians. That's the truth of it. They were trying to keep that, kind of on the down low, because you don't want your operatives, their identities exposed and have it be blasted to the world. And that's what came out in that audit. That was the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Justice. They found that the FBI constantly made errors in their warrant requests to FISA when they were demanding surveillance of Americans. And so it was from that in 2019 that the FISA court demanded that the FBI submit a very formalized plan on how to fix their inadequacies. And that's when Chris Wray came up with a 40-point training plan to correct this is Reason from January 16th of 2020, a 40-point training plan to correct FBI surveillance procedures so they were compliant with privacy protections for Americans. But yet none of that actually came into play. That was all kind of, it took a back seat to everything else. I mean, it's insane the way that they care. And it was, I mean, they even had a report that came out and said that the wiretapping of Carter Page, the FBI was trying to say, well, that wasn't motivated by political bias, as though that was somehow an excuse for the shoddy work that they did in trying to justify it. Again, he was a CIA asset against the Russians. But that's not what they wanted for the narrative. They needed for the narrative. And remember, what was all this fueled by? How did we get to the point where you have the FBI abusing and FISA to spy on Carter Page? You guys remember? It went back to some of the reports about Carter Page and Russians that appeared in the press. Now, where did this come from? Those were stories that were planted by Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS, which was an unregistered foreign agent lobbying on behalf of Russian oligarchs. They worked with discredited British spy Chris Steele and Russians to try to push this stuff out about people in Trump's orbit. And who were they hired by? Perkins Coie. Who's Perkins Coie? That's the third-party law firm that was hired by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. And we know this because they got fined for not claiming it as a campaign expense. That's how all of this came out. So you can't say that they didn't weaponize it for political means because it was literally financed by a political campaign. And all they knew was that why does this guy seem to have some Russian connections? Why does Carter Page seem to have Russian connections? That's all they knew. Well, they didn't know because he's a damn operative for the CIA against Russians. And that begrudgingly came out when they tried to get him. Imagine that. Imagine you're the FBI and you just got owned by the CIA because you tried to compromise one of their operatives for Hillary Clinton and the DNC. That's literally what happened. And it was made possible with the abuse of FISA. So, which brings us to back to our current position. With Thomas Massie explaining that it was a procedural vote. It was a difference in tactics, he says. And they were trying to throw a wrench by preventing this from coming to the floor. Thomas Massie was getting some criticism because people mistakenly thought that he voted with Democrats. Democrats did not want the amendment on FISA to come to the floor. Massie thinks that the whole damn thing needs to be tore down and redone. Democrats want to be able to have warrantless surveillance. There's the difference. And they want to, he says now they could suspend the rules and pass a worse FISA. He says they could make some improvements and some concessions, but he's like, well, maybe or let the Senate move first on it. I mean, it's kind of wild. And then he noted, and this was last month, that while they were winning the debate on warrants for domestic spying, that's when the speaker yanked the bill and canceled Congress for the rest of the week. Remember when they canceled Congress? Sent everybody home? There you go. So it's not done yet. But there is the whole thing with the Trump campaign. I don't care if you like Trump or hate him. If you don't believe that the government should be spying on Americans motivated by politics, you need to be into this. Because it doesn't matter. One day it's Trump, the next day maybe it's you. You don't know. All of the requests, and this is what the Inspector General and IG report into this, the investigation into this is what they found. The entirety of the FISA claim laid on the dossier that was being laundered through the press as evidence. The entirety of the claim for warrantless surveillance. It was the Chris Steele discredited dossier. That, if you remember, while the FBI was trying to use that to get FISA to grant them surveillance, The FBI refused to verify a single damn thing in the dossier. They would not verify it. Do you remember back the emails between two agents where they were actually questioning the veracity of the claims made in the dossier? But they were told to shut up and go along with it anyway. The reason that we know a lot of this is because there were some good people. There's some good people in the FBI. There were some whistleblowers in there who were like, oh, hell no, this is not what we signed up for. Absolutely not. Some of them lost their jobs because of it. They lost their pensions. They lost everything to blow the whistle on this. And Democrats don't want to have a discussion about it. And the reason they don't want to have a discussion about it, because it literally shines the light, the glare of media cameras, on the fact that they actually weaponized surveillance to discredit and rob you of your vote in 2016. Because they thought if they could make this argument about Carter Page, then they could make this about Trump. They could blow it up and then show that Trump was somehow compromised. But can you imagine how much of a smacked ass did that FBI agent that first found out that that was actually a CIA operative against Russia? How dumb did that guy have to feel? This is like it's like a television show.
Well, he was immediately protected, though.
Oh, yeah, he was. Is that not the craziest thing you've ever heard? The CIA actually has to go, are you kidding? You stupid morons.